Sami Hermez is a professor of anthropology at Northwestern University in Qatar. He's the author of two books, War is Coming, Between Past and Future, Violence in Lebanon, and his latest book is My Brother, My Land, a story from Palestine. Welcome to Deciphered, Sami. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Sami, just to start, can you describe and explain the current dynamics between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah? What's happening there? Where are things going?
Yeah, I mean it's a big question to be honest. I think in general this government has been really antagonistic towards Hezbollah as you can see. I think the big thing was on March 2nd once the war between Israel and Hezbollah sort of kicked off again. The government banned Hezbollah as a sort of military, as a resistance and whatnot. And so it's kind of going after it. But I think, maybe if we wanted to look at this with a little bit more nuance, might be useful to actually think of this as kind of not government versus Hezbollah, but two parties, like two. I mean, maybe for Canadian viewers, you think of like conservatives and liberals, right? And you have right now the anti-Hezbollah, pro-US, uh, you know, constellation of parties. It's not one party, but that are in government. And what the difference, though, again, to use that kind of comparison, is that in Canada or the US, Democrats, Republican, you tend to have a united foreign policy. So regardless of, the conservatives, they're not going to come to power and say, we're going to align with Russia. Or when Trump makes some kind of, Canada is going to be the 51st state comments, you don't have conservatives allying with the Americans against the liberals, for example, Liberal Party. Whereas in Lebanon, you don't have that unified foreign policy. So you have a case where there's one side, the government today, that's allied with the US and essentially allied with Israel, although they won't come out and say it, right? Against another side that wants to resist settler colonialism. And so you get into all the sort of details of what is Hezbollah as a party and the sort of attacks left and right. But essentially that's sort of what you have at the moment. And so you have the government trying to going into negotiations with no leverage. I mean, Hezbollah is the leverage, but they're distancing themselves from the leverage and leaving Hezbollah out to dry, which is your sort of, your essentially your weapons because you don't have an army as the Lebanese government, and going to these negotiations. And funnily enough, I don't know how much people know, but Trump was trying to get the president of Lebanon to meet Netanyahu. And it's kind of funny because actually, if you come to think of it, the UAE MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, has not met with Netanyahu. And they're completely, in cahoots, normalization, whatnot. And so we kind of just want to skip everything. So there's a lot of, I think, and I think maybe the last thing I'd want to say on this is that the general relationship has been one, even since like 2006. There's been a kind of, I don't know if I want to call it a strategy, but essentially like strength through our weakness, that our division can actually be used as strength. So I'll give the government the sort of benefit of the doubt to say, well, we need to distance ourselves from Hezbollah because we can't, because otherwise the whole country will be sacrificed, right? Like Israel will just carpet bomb the whole country. And so, the South, we've sort of kind of given it on a silver platter, but there's this recognition that the South is going to sacrifice. But at least maybe we can save the rest of the country. So we'll distance ourselves from Hezbollah. But in this latest round, it's sort of crossed the red line, I think, where you're stepping into all sorts of dangerous territory, and allying yourselves with Israeli interests, completely, yeah, it's just complete sort of the interests have been sort of entangled between the government and the Lebanese government and the Israeli government.
Right, right. Yeah, that's super helpful, Sammy. And okay, so building on that. So Israel wants basically vassal states all across the Middle East. They want states that just are subdued, get down on their knees, do what Israel says to do, forget the Palestinian cause, let go of the idea of even a fake Palestinian state, and so on. But if they can't get a vassal state, they want it. They want states around the Middle East to be, chaotic states, unstable, fighting in civil wars, fragmented, maybe even, dividing up into multiple small states, whatever. They don't care. As long as they're fighting with each other, they're not opposing Israel. And that's clearly their strategy in Lebanon. They don't care about the Lebanese people. They don't care about stability. They don't care about security or economic stability for Lebanese people. They just want Lebanon to be fighting a civil war if they don't form a vassal state that coalesces around obedience to Israel. So, which political forces inside Lebanon see this strategy in clear ways? And are there some who don't? Like, does the government understand that Israel is driving them towards a civil war?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do think that there's some level of insanity like that you just, absurdity that you don't understand. I think there are groups, I think, in government that are governed by a sense of wishful thinking. That maybe if we don't resist, that Israel will leave us alone, right? And I don't know on what historical basis they rely upon, but I think that's what wishful thinking does, is that really like you're so defeated and weak that your last straw is to hang on not onto resistance because you see what happens, right? And if you're not invested in certain ways, then the destruction and the death count become the the prism with which you see the world, right? And of course, if you're that's the prism, then resistance is always going to be not the thing that you want to do because resistance inevitably means you are resisting a stronger power that has the capacity to destroy you in any context anywhere in the world, right? So if destruction and material damage is your lens, then yeah, I mean, you're obviously going to run. And so I think that leaves people sort of at a loss. And so they still have this wishful thinking. And that's one part of this answer. The other part of this answer is that you do have groups that are, I'd say, for example, the Lebanese forces might be one of those groups that do have a vision of Lebanon, also historically, that's more in alliance with Israel, that we can maybe have some kind of rapprochement, and then and there's some sort of anti-Muslim thing going on there that like then maybe we can rule over the Muslims. And I think if you look at historically again, when Lebanon was created, it was created in this sort of greater Lebanon geography, meaning that historically Lebanon is the mountains, Mount Lebanon, right? And then in the Ottoman empires, you had the Mutasarrifiyya of Lebanon. So you had this like small mountain range. And the Maronites, pre-independence, they argued that a Lebanon that's small would not be economically viable. So we need a greater Lebanon. It's an economic project, essentially. And I think they thought that they could rule over the people this would encompass, namely the Muslims of different sects. But obviously, that hasn't been the case. And so I think there is also a sense ideologically that maybe we need to retreat. We need to create a smaller Lebanon, right? And that materializes in sort of calls for federalism, for example. So just trying to figure out, and that can be either an end or it could be code for, federalism, then you sort of detach completely. And so there is like a sense of this retreat, and the land that you essentially would give away would be the south. Maybe Israel takes that, right? So there is also a sense of well, we don't, there, again, the kind of colliding interests between Israel and certain groups that at some point in the wars in the 1970s and 80s, the Lebanese forces, they aligned themselves with Israel militarily, but now things are different. So then they do it in different ways, right? Rhetorically, you distance on one hand, and you sort of blame Hezbollah for it all, and it, of course, um, yeah. I think the other part of this is that you have a media that is all sort of become aligned in one direction, and so that also moves the story in a certain way and moves the narrative in a certain way. So I think people will recognize if you ask anyone, like, well, Israel wants this. Like, this is what Israel want. They want chaos. They'll tell you, yeah, we know, but either what can we do? We have to try this. We haven't tried the way of, I don't know, quote unquote, peace or whatnot. We haven't tried to give up our resistance and the weapons. And so they come up with all these kind of things. Not They won't tell you, oh no, Israel. No one's going to say, oh, Israel is cool and we love Israel. I think, 99%. There are people who obviously think that, but 99% would say that, this is a beast, and we basically have to learn how to live with the beast, how to live with the bully. And of course, anyone who has done any work on bullies, your high school bully, that's not how you deal with bullies, is not right. So to just kind of cower,
You're
you just
encouraging more bullying. The more you cower, the more bullying
e-
happens. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And Sammy, I'm just wondering, like, who like for everybody listening, who the bullies really are in this case. And what I'm going to do is maybe structure this as a two-part question, because this is one point that keeps being brought up a lot in the West, right? That Hezbollah is an actor, a terrorist organization, serving almost the interests of Iran in Lebanon. To what extent is that true? And then even maybe I'm going to ask that question first. To what extent is that even true? To what extent is Hezbollah independent? What is the structure of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon versus, let's say, the bigger war against Iran? And we might get into another question there about the goals of the actors in the Iran war. But just think about Lebanon first.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's a way that we talk about um, US allies, but Iranian proxies, right?
Yeah.
So and it's not just Iran. Essentially, like our enemies, meaning, I don't know, Canada's enemies in your context or America's enemies. Our enemies have proxies. We have allies, right? So the Gulf states are our allies. Israel is our ally, speaking as an American, right? Whereas Hezbollah can only be a proxy. It can't have agency. I think ideologically, Hezbollah is very much connected ideologically with Iran, but they are not just a Lebanese group, but I think they are a group that is fighting for liberation of their land. They emerge ideologically out of a religious Shia doctrine or like sort of beliefs, and they are their thinking is transnational, if you will. But that also has a way of being seen as a negative, because the other side is seen as, caring about Lebanon first, or wanting the strength to strengthen the state. But the other side is also very much tied transnationally through sort of forms of global capitalism, right? In the sense that their alliance, who are their allies, right? How are they thinking? What sort of influences do they want, right? So, this idea that one side is like the big bad, right? Hezbollah is a big bad guy in Lebanese politics, and the other side are, poor victims is a skewed way of seeing things. And I don't want to get into like sort of the internal affairs, because internally Hezbollah has been problematic, uh, but it's problematic as one amongst various allies, right? And so you get into the situation where if it rains tomorrow, it's Hezbollah's fault, right? So everything becomes Hezbollah's fault. And it's a way for all the other political parties to kind of skirt their own complicity in, for example, the financial crisis, in the sectarian system, and the fact that we don't have any kind of working state services or anything like that. So I think again, it's just very easy to paint our enemies as terrorists and the big sort of big bad guys. Um, but ultimately, I think we need to understand what the Zionist project is doing in the Levant, right? In Palestine and Syria and Lebanon, and I think even further in Jordan we can talk about. And I mean, we see what happened in the last few months that the war came crawling to the doorsteps of Gulf countries, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and actually, speaking of that, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the Gulf countries' reactions to the war on Iran, but also, what do you like? What do you think the Gulf countries will do? Israel says we're going to colonize southern Lebanon. We're gonna go up to at least the Litani River. They're operationalizing that as we speak. They're not backing down on it. Do you think the Gulf countries are gonna draw a line here, or is it gonna be more of the same, where just like they've accepted the colonization of the overwhelming majority of Palestine, they're gonna now accept the colonization of parts of Lebanon and parts of Syria and try to live with the beast, as you were saying earlier, or are there? Yeah, where do you see the Gulf moving in general?
Muhannad, it really it boggles the mind. I think trying to understand, I think I don't know, poker or one of these games must really explain a lot in the sense that, like, when you bet and you're sort of all in, and then someone says, raises you, and then you kind of just need to put in more. And so I think that's where the Gulf countries sort of find themselves. And in that sense, I think, unfortunately, you will see more of the same in the sense that, you might see condemnation, but that doesn't really amount to much, right? The Arab countries collectively, I mean, even not just the Arab countries, the Muslim countries, I think the world in general, right? Like, nobody is coming to the aid, right? And the most you get, we clap because Spain, the Prime Minister of Spain stands up and says a few nice words, and all of a sudden is like a bit pro-Palestinian, and like we hang on to that hope. But it's all words, right? Nobody is. The Gulf countries are still, not really materially changing their politics. Forget on the US, but like just in general on Israel, right? And I think we've entered a new phase in warfare that is really dangerous in the sense that we have this new thing called a ceasefire, which is not really a ceasefire. So what's really interesting is that since April 17 in Lebanon, uh, Israel has not uh, conducted, how should I put this, has not conducted a single or has not engaged in any violations of the ceasefire. And I think that might sound bizarre to some of your listeners, but since April 17, Israel has not violated the ceasefire. And the reason is that the ceasefire allows Israel to fire at will. So it's violated international laws of war by killing God knows how many medics, and there's, like, I'd say, a medicide in the south of Lebanon, but it hasn't violated the ceasefire because the ceasefire actually says that it can attack at will. And so, but we are in a world right now where, who talks about Gaza anymore because there's a ceasefire. There are people dying and being bombed in Gaza every day, and the genocide continues. And I think the scary thing is that this is a new reality, and thankfully Hezbollah is fighting back this time. And the first 15 months, it sat there and waited, and I guess the thinking was, let's see where this process takes us. and maybe consolidating and so on and so forth, and because they were hit hard. But now they're, attacking. But it's a ceasefire because I'm going to go down to Lebanon in the summer, and in Beirut in the north, the party continues. It's quite sick, but that's really what the ceasefire is about, is leave the rest of the country aside. And for some groups in the country, that's fine, right? Politically, ideologically, let's sever the South. So
Sami,
yeah.
I'm trying to sort of, even if we can simplify things for our listeners a little bit. We're hearing this catchphrase often that is since October 7th of 2023 that Israel has a right to defend itself, right? And the sort of the idea, many ideas associated with this terminology includes that sort of whatever Israel does is necessary because it's a defensive measure, and it creates this idea that Israel is being attacked unprovoked. And this is sort of the idea of October 7th. And this is where Hezbollah comes in. You have a lot of people asking, why would Hezbollah involve itself by attacking Israel? How would it bring this upon Lebanon? And now Israel needs to act in this way. Now, how do you respond to these sort of ideas? And it permeates, I would say, Western media and a lot of what we say in academia, the creation of knowledge, right? Which is really a lot of the thought around amongst Western analysts, let's say, when they look at Lebanon and Israel and try to understand what's taking place. So this idea that really Hezbollah is just keeps attacking Israel and Israel needs to act.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is the way that things get set up, is that there's this, as if that before October 7 there was peace between um, Israel and Hezbollah, right? Or Israel and Lebanon. And that as if prior to October 7 there weren't daily, I think almost daily, violations of Lebanese territory, airspace, land that was occupied. And so, if Israel wanted peace with Lebanon and wanted to sort of end this, they would have just completely left Lebanon in 2000, not remained with some pieces of land and whatnot. But so what happens is there becomes again like the ceasefire, right? There's this overall narrative, right? That then if Hezbollah breaks that, it's seen as the party that is violating, right? Now, October 8 was a maybe strategically, Hassan Nasrallah felt that the Lebanese needed to, or Hezbollah needed to come to the aid of Gaza, that it could not sit on the sidelines. There are all kinds of reasons for why it needed to choose that moment. Again, the reason why it chooses March 1st or 2nd to attack Israel is because Khamenei was killed, and so it's retaliation. These are reasons for the escalation of some uh, of a situation that is not peace, right? Of a situation that is occupation, that is settler colonialism, and so on. And I think the problem, of course, is, I mean, Israel doesn't have a right neither to defend itself or to exist. And so I mean, that's also part of the larger issue of how we understand that. What does Israel have a right to exist as an apartheid state? Does it have a right to exist as a settler colony? And right to exist, not to resist, right to exist as an apartheid state. So, and if the situation of apartheid, if that like sort of beginning situation is wrong and unjust, then there's a need to resist that situation, right? And Israel can't claim to defend apartheid. Essentially, that's what's defending, right? And so, I'm of the opinion that even if Israel is not occupying Lebanon, there is a duty of Lebanese, of Jordanians, of Americans, of Canadians to liberate Palestine and to end an apartheid situation, right? And Israel doesn't have the right to defend that. So there's all kinds of, I mean, we can approach this from different perspectives, but even just the like basic international law and forget morality aside, on the basis of international law, Israel is occupying, is violating, right? So because like my response to you could be, okay, so since Israel had violated Lebanese airspace from 2006 to 2023, I don't know how many thousand times, should Hezbollah have lobbed rockets after every one of those violations, right? Should have Hezbollah have sent a drone to just surveil Israel in every one of those violations? And of course, those same people are going to say, no, of course not, right? But that would be defending itself. Hezbollah didn't do that. It chose to attack on October 8 because the situation was no longer tenable and it had
So,
to.
so something that might seem confusing to people too is that there's an impression that Iran is controlling Hezbollah, including a lot of folks in Lebanon believe this, and I think say that are opposed to Hezbollah. Is that true? Like, would they be directing Hezbollah to attack Israel on their behalf since some time?
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's a good question. And I think, again, this goes back to the idea of alliance, right? And that I think, there are accounts also that suggest that it was Hezbollah, for example, that pushed Khamenei to enter Syria, right? Not the other way around, right?
Syria,
So,
when would that be? Sorry, just to clarify for
and in
everybody.
2012, 2013,
So
right?
after
So
the civil war got
the
underway.
uprising, so in the uprisings in the Arab Spring, right? Then
Hmm.
there was this, right, the war, and the Iranians came in on the side of Assad, and Nasrallah was there are, again, these are different accounts, but my point here is that in an alliance, things can go in either direction. And I think, and Hezbollah is a homegrown resistance that needs a foreign power to support it, right? And that's just, some people would say, oh yeah, we want a resistance, but we don't want to rely on Iran. Okay, great. Who do you want to rely on? You can't make your own weapons. So you need someone to supply you with weapons. The US is not going to supply you with weapons. The US won't supply the Lebanese military with weapons, strong enough to defend the country. So Iran is there. There's ideologically, Iran is also believes that U.S. empire should not have a space in the region, and does not believe that Israel plays a positive role in the region, and that is an ideological commitment of the Iranian government. And so that is an alliance, ideological, interest-based, there with a long-term view to establish sovereignty in a way that we saw in the last few months. Iranian sovereignty kicked the region's ass, basically, right? Like they make their own weapons, they're able to stand up to the US despite the sacrifices and the material destruction. And on the other side, you have, as Muhannad said, vassal states from, I mean, I don't, vassal states all over the world.